Welcome everyone to the American Family Insurance Dream Bank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. My name is Andy Frisky. I'm a senior dream curator with DreamBank, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Always like to poll the guest and ask where they're tuning in from. And if you feel comfortable, please go ahead and share so in the chat. And then again, a little bit about DreamBank for maybe some of you who aren't familiar. So here at American Family Insurance, we believe that communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. And that's why DreamBank was created. It's an inspirational community destination and digital experience that is dedicated to dreamers everywhere. Our offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey and overcome obstacles and stay motivated. I'll go ahead and put a couple links in the chat just to share a little bit more about the space as well as our upcoming events that we have as well. But really excited to introduce our speaker today, Todd Hoskins. Todd, I think at this point is a DreamBank veteran, I would like to say. Todd is part of the Canopy Gap, but without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and kick it over to Todd and let him take it away. Todd, have at it.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you to DreamBank and American Family Insurance. I believe I've been in the DreamBank building at least 3 times, and have gotten to know Andy over the years, and love the programming and the spirit in which they do their work. So my name is Todd. I am one of the founders of Canopy Gap. I am going to pull up a visual presentation. I like pictures. We're talking about team dynamics today. It's a fun topic for me. I hope it will be a fun topic for all of you. And this is what we are going to move through. I'm going to do a little introduction so you know who I am and why I'm talking about this. Then we're going to dive into what is this thing we're talking about called team dynamics? Why are they important? Some ways to read your team dynamics. A handful of tips on how you can improve the dynamics. And then, as Andy said, we'll take some questions at the end. Please feel free to utilize the chat. I'm going to keep the window open, so you are welcome to interrupt me as I go. So Canopy Gap was founded in 2009. Originally, we were a strategy firm. We have moved in over the years to the field of organization design. Well, first, what is a canopy gap? A canopy gap is a phenomenon that happens in every forest ecosystem. Somehow, there must be room in the canopy of the forest for light to reach the forest floor for the next generation and future generations of growth to occur. We could talk for many, many minutes about the different ways that forests coordinate to create canopy gaps, but that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about team dynamics, not forest dynamics. So organization design, and let's start with an assumption that design is not some elite fancy field, that everyone is a designer. You make choices every day. You design your own life on the fly. And so those of us who work in various fields of design, we are helping, coming alongside to design the ways that people work together and relate as teams. An organization designer doesn't really create org charts as much as they help create the dynamics for organizations to flourish that sometimes also includes org charts. We're dealing with a legacy that we'll talk a little bit about today, of this pragmatic approach that let's go with what works. And I'm a pragmatist myself, so I'm thrilled to let's go with what works. The problem with the workplace is that it's not working. People are disengaged from work. The Gallup poll 5 years ago, international global poll, found that 85% of global workers are disengaged. And they define that as how much do they fully show up for work every day, excited to do what they do. So that's roughly 1 in every 6 people on the planet love doing what they do. Something is wrong here. And for those of us in the field of organization design, we are looking at ways that we can boost that number. And we are in this time of uncontrollable uncertainty. I would say that we've always been in a time of uncontrollable uncertainty, but we're really feeling it right now. The organization structures that we thought have worked for decades don't seem to be working as well as we thought. And in this period of uncontrollable uncertainty, a lot of questions are coming up. How do we work together more effectively? How do we collaborate? I refer to this as the mess. And by saying it's a mess, I'm not saying it's good or bad, just that it's complex. There's so many choices, there's so much information, there's so much going on, there's so much change. How do we create workplaces where people and the organization flourish? So in this mess, we don't know what will happen. That unpredictable, uncontrollable sense of we don't know what the outcomes are going to be from the decisions we're making right now, that our problems seem to be interconnected to other problems, and we don't know the impact of our actions and choices. This is like a wave that's crashing upon the world of work right now. And really, it could be symbolized by a wave next to a question mark. And the question is, how do we work together effectively? Well, team dynamics is a part of addressing that. We have been in the mindset that efficiency is what matters. And there's a growing movement to say efficiency is really important, but what about vitality? What does it mean for an organization to be alive? And if it's alive, will it be efficient? So the field of organization design, we work within these various domains of action. We're not just in the C-suite, we're actually working with the day-to-day operations, with leadership, but also with how do we function in meetings? How do we team together? What are the structures that work for us right now? What are the communication flows and the agreements that we make between one another? What are the values that help us decide what to say yes to and no to? What are the horizons we're moving towards? How do we learn and share effectively? What are rituals and practices that work for us? How do we make decisions? And then how does compensation fit into this? We're going to come back to these domains of action a few times today because this is where it gets applied. So it's not just theory. And here are some of the organizations the Canopy Gap has worked with. We're not going to talk about case studies or anything today. We're just going to say, this is the world that I want to live in. This is the world that I'm committed to doing what I can and what we can at Canopy Gap so that people can show up as their full creative selves, working together on something greater than themselves. That's our benchmark. That's what we're working towards. Okay, so you know a little bit about the field of organization design. You know a little bit about Canopy Gap. Let's talk about this topic of dynamics. You've all experienced it. And I have a picture here, one of a meeting and two of a produce section of a grocery store. And let's start with the produce section of a grocery store. You walk into one grocery store versus another, there's a feel to it. It's not just how the aisles are arranged, how the shelves are stocked. It's how the people interact with you in there, but there's also an energy to that grocery store. We tend to go to stores that are closest. And for those of us in urban areas, not me, those in urban areas, you have more choices of where to go. People tend to go to places that are either close or the dynamics of the store and the pricing of the store works for them. The problem is we don't really talk about these dynamics. The feel of the store, the sense of being in there, it's much more than aesthetics. The same thing goes for a meeting. When you have a 1 p.m. meeting and you sit down perhaps on your desk in Zoom or perhaps in a conference room, 10 minutes into that meeting has a feel to it. It might be boring. It might be lively. It might feel worthless. It might feel important. But that feeling, that sense, those are the dynamics. And teams actually tend to move into patterns of dynamics with each other and with the organization. So why are dynamics often overlooked? Well, you could probably guess some of the answers here. The first is I'm already talking about energy. We're wary of talking about the energy of the room or the energy of the team or the energy of the initiative. Where is their momentum is another way of talking about energy. Another reason why they've been overlooked is dynamics are invisible. They can't effectively be measured. Now, at Canopy Gap, we have ways of doing pulse measures to get it something right now in the moment. But as soon as that moment is past, the dynamics have shifted because they're just that. They're dynamic. They're always changing. They do follow patterns, but they're constantly changing. So anything that's measured in the past and anything that's measured, you're asking for a person to reflect on their sense of something. And then finally, the dynamics don't fit well within the paradigm of control. We're going to dive into that a little bit so you can see why dynamics have been overlooked and also see the possibilities beyond it. So we're at this very interesting time as a species, as a planet, where we've been pretending we can tame the wild and be in control. As human beings, as leaders and organizations. And the thing with dynamics is you cannot control them. Just like we are having a very hard time understanding how we can have a long-term hospitable relationship with the planet, we can't control dynamics. This sense of needing to control this is fine. That's part of being human, of being thrown into this universe and trying to discover who we are and why we're here and what we're doing. We desire that control, but the need to exert control has reached its maximum. And we've been pretending that we can control other people, that we can control the outcomes, that we can control nature. As my friend Rachel Happy here has a shirt that says control is for amateurs, encouraging people in leadership to see that there is ways beyond control to effectively lead a team. And part of this is coming because the age of which we are moving through, emerging from, has been so much focused on order. Like these monocrop fields right here, that we plant everything in a row, that we create this order. And the dominant paradigm here, you can see the gears here, is that we've been living under this illusion that our systems are predictable, they're controllable, and we can understand them if we break them down into parts. The machine metaphor fits with the age of control. But our organizations are not machines, our teams are not machines, people are not machines. And this has affected, this paradigm has affected all of these fields of study. We wanted to be able to predict and control everything from cellular biology to physics to human behavior, and we've reached its maximum. It's not wrong, it's just incomplete. So in this machine age, this age of control, human beings often strive to become useful, productive, problem-solving machines. This is why the dynamics are so important, because we're not machines. And being able to feel what it's like to be in an organization that is creative, that's alive, that's serving people, that's growing both in revenue and impact and depth and longevity and sustainability. Part of this age of control was scientific management, which has been around for about 100 years and essentially boils down to how can management control labor? So we've been stuck between these extremes that are not good for our well-being, they're not good for our organizations, these extremes of rigidity and chaos. So the clients that Canopy Gap serves often fall somewhere on this spectrum between rigidity and chaos. Rigidity means we're going to make rules for everything. We're going to enforce those rules, and we're going to make sure that everyone does what they need to do. That's usually what a rigid organization looks like. Chaotic, often the startup companies, some nonprofits that I'm aware of. Chaotic means it is fly by the seat of your pants. It is nonstop excitement. Everything is changing all the time. Both of these extremes are not healthy. They don't lead to long-term sustainable teams and organizations. So getting to the importance of dynamics and moving beyond the age of control in this machine metaphor. So let's look at a handful of dynamics. And you can come up with your own list. The way that we think about dynamics are, what are those qualities of being in relationship with your teammates, with your family members, with your community? What are those qualities that you can name, but are very difficult to define? And so one of those that I've already mentioned, vitality, that feeling of aliveness, that you walk into a room and you know whether that feels alive to you. Chances are it feels alive to other people too. It's the experience of intersubjectivity, that we're having a similar experience. We just don't have ways to define and measure that effectively. So these dynamics of safety, of resonance, of creativity, of trust and vitality are so important for teams, and they've been overlooked. And it's exciting when you think about there's mutual reinforcing nature of dynamics that are directed towards more life. That when I feel fully alive, when there's vitality, I am more creative. And when I am more creative, my heart is more palpable, it's more open. And this would also be true for other of these life-giving dynamics. It's important to mention safety's role in this. And there's a lot of good academic work around psychological safety right now. And I think it needs to move beyond the current just focus on can't do no harm. That I feel safe and that it does not feel dangerous, to it feels a level of safety in which I can fully be myself. So things are not safe or unsafe. There's a whole range in between. And for an organization or for a team to be able to create the environments where people don't just feel apart from danger, but they can be fully themselves. So when we're looking at this, we look at safety offers room to fail. That safety repairs harm. When there is harm done within a team or within a family, that there will be effort to repair it. That consent is honored, and that people's individual thoughts, feelings, and experience are welcomed, as different as they are. If these four qualities exist on a team, it's going to be more than just not dangerous, it's going to be safe, and people are going to show up more fully present, more creative, and have more fun. So Bayo Okomolafe, and if you're not familiar with Bayo's work, I definitely encourage you to read or listen to Bayo, who's essentially been writing and speaking a lot on the nature of dynamics. What he says is one of the most powerful strategies afforded to us today is to learn how to meet the invisible, not to solve it, but to sit with it. And how I interpret Bayo here is that the willingness to say, these things that I can't define, these things that I can't measure are important, and I'm willing to open up my awareness to them, to give them some credence, and to say, what can we do about this? What actions can we take? But knowing that it's not a problem to be solved. So the most simple definition of energy that I know in physics is the capacity to do stuff. And that's what we're talking about with the invisible here, is what is that team's capacity to do stuff, not just get stuff done, but do stuff in an amazing, creative, innovative way. So if we can get over our hang up that, we don't want to talk about energy, and that's fine, to imagine that every group of people has a capacity within that group. And how can we tap into that capacity in a greater way? That's the call for leadership today. As a baseball fan, I have to bring baseball in some way. Tony La Russa, the manager of the Chicago White Sox, said yes last year in an interview that give me a formula that measures chemistry. There's no metric for that, but you better believe you need it if you're going to win. It's a tangible, intangible, you can feel it. What he's speaking to here is you'll hear it in locker rooms, you'll hear it in press conferences about the energy of the team on the sports field or on the court. You don't hear that as much in the conference rooms of business. And it's about heart. I'm not afraid to say that it's actually love that powers organizations, not the feel-good, falling in love sort of love, but that power of the heart that is part of the dynamics of organizations that thrive. And all of this contributes to wiring the organizational nervous system so that as there's more resonance, as there's more vitality, there's more awareness. And then the free flow of communication means we're tuned in to what's happening in the world with each other, with opportunities, and we can respond quickly. We can be a responsive organization when our dynamics are full of life. Okay, so we've talked about dynamics, and perhaps you're sensing that I feel that they're very important. So on my team or in my organization, how do I get a sense of these? If I can't send them a survey, I can't measure it, how can I read it? And I just want to offer some questions that are ways of approaching this. So the first one is, does the energy vary within your team? And that is the cycles of life. That's why we have that, just like we have seasons, that if it is just flatlining, if it is like boring and quote productive, there's some issues with dynamics. Or if it's chaotic, bouncing off the walls, constant activity, constant change of direction. So one way of thinking about this is, do we have a healthy variance? Do we have meetings and conversations that are dead serious? And yet, do we have lots of laughter? Thinking of this as serious play, that people showing up as their full selves for something greater than themselves can feel like play, and yet directed towards the betterment of community and family, it is dead serious at the same time. So another question to ponder is emotions. Do people appropriately share how they feel? The word appropriately is very important here, because I am not going to share with my beloved or my closest friends the same things I'm going to share with my colleagues. But part of our sensory apparatus as human beings is to respond to stimuli that give us these senses, and emotions are one of them. And so there's this wisdom in emotions. And if you have a team in which emotions are not shared, such as I'm afraid that we're not moving in the right direction, I'm excited about that meeting we had yesterday, I am confused. It's a great sign when people in an organization can say, I am confused, because that's a sign of safety. And it's also an expression of emotion. So serious play, expression of emotions, wild surprises. Are there conversations and ideas that seem wacky at times? Getting beyond that serious play to what do human beings love to do? We love to create with what we're given. We love to create that in teams. We're not meant to be there's the myth of the individual performer. That doesn't really work in today's world as we now understand the social and the communal nature of how we work best. So an outcome is that sometimes you have wild and crazy ideas that are expressed, or conversations that seem off the wall. And that's a sign of safety, and that I feel permission to bring that up. But it's also a sign of aliveness, that I'm willing to go there. I'm willing to put that out there. And then finally, tension. Tension is part of life. We can't live without tension. And it's so important to creativity and to growth. So are differences valued within the team? Are they expressed in beneficial ways? Do we enjoy our differences, even when sometimes they make us feel uncomfortable? And that could be differences of identity, that could be differences of perspective, differences of ideas. If those tensions can be expressed in the workplace, it's a sign of well-being and the dynamics of life. And then the one question that I think would sum this up is, does this feel alive? Does this meeting feel alive? Does this plan feel alive? Does this compensation structure feel alive? And by that, I don't mean frenetic or to feel alive can sometimes be quiet, but there's just a sense of there's a there. And so is that aliveness in our communication flows, in our agreements, in our values? At Canopy Gap, we do work with organizations on how they understand their identity and express their values. And it's so important that those values feel alive and the expressions feel alive. Even the rituals and practices, that they feel alive. They don't feel like going through the motions. So what can you do? Well, I want to start with a caution statement. This is the good news and the bad news. The good news is that in dynamics, every interaction matters. So a conversation that you have on chat with a colleague matters. A CEO address to an all-staff meeting matters. A shareholder meeting, all of these, every interaction matters. But if you're a retail organization, in the store, with customers, in the break room, all of these interactions contribute to these dynamics. So that's both exciting and that's scary. And I feel like the only way we can approach this is to say, we can't comprehensively come up with something that will shift the dynamics overall. We're just going to have a commitment to do some small things and see what happens. Because blueprints don't work with human behavior. There's too much messiness. There's too much complexity. And the world is too dynamic. It's changing too much. There's too much difference. And speaking of blueprints, Christopher Alexander, this participatory architect who passed away last year, had a great impact on many fields outside of architecture. And what I love about Alexander's contribution to these fields of design as he looks for patterns that generate life. And that's what we're looking for as leaders, as designers. Since we're all designers, we're looking for the patterns that generate life. We're going to try things on. And the dynamics of life is the way the world works. So it's when I look outside and take a walk through the woods, and the birds this morning were making a lot of noise, but there's so much more activity that is not audible, that is not seen, to understand the microbiotic activity in the soil, and all the things that are going on in that ecosystem, with the thriving dynamics of life. Our organizations could be the same way if we can move beyond the metaphor, the machine, the age of control, and be nurturers and protectors of life. So the way we approach this is by looking, there's some principles that seem to be quite universal within the dynamics of life, and then they differ in how they're applied in the context, because organizations and teams are different. And the reason that this can start anywhere, Samantha Slade, an organization designer, wrote this book called Going Horizontal. And what Samantha said is, you don't need to wait for the senior leadership team to enact some changes, because anything that creates a positive momentum creates these waves of the contagion effect. People are drawn to life. As Janine Benyus says, life creates conditions conducive to life. And so if we can experiment and find the ones that create life now, because that may not a year from now, that will have a positive effect beyond what we can predict. So one of these principles is participation. So what can you do? And this is usually the first thing I bring up to anyone who says, okay, I would just like to, our culture is getting a little bit stale. The dynamics are just a little bit dry. And the first, I think, category of experimentation is, how can we get higher levels of participation? And that could mean in a meeting, requesting people have a more equitable allocation of time, inviting people, not forcing people to talk, or in a larger initiative to make sure that there are a greater number of stakeholders involved, and not just to check a box, but actually influencing their decision, influencing the direction and the decisions that are made. As Peter Block, who wrote Community, the Art of Belonging, says, people are committed to what they have a hand in creating. So one way to bring life is to invite people to do more, to have a greater impact. And that can be from customers to colleagues, to community members. Participation is a great way. Diversity is another universal principle that can create some tension, some healthy tension, but powers creativity and evolution and integration. So if I want more life on a team, I can ask, what are some different types of people? What are some different perspectives? How can we bring these in? That's going to create more life. Now, it also helps to have some skilled facilitators who can then deal with those tensions and differences as they come up, so that that can be life-giving in the interactions. So going back to those domains of action, where vitality becomes real, where the dynamics of life, where this is where it matters. I just want to look at one big can of worms. Get asked this all the time. Why do we have so many meetings? How can we make our meetings better? Can we get rid of meetings? It seems like many people in the organizational world are plagued by their schedules, their calendars, and what feels like the necessity and ineffectiveness of their meetings. So there's many ways that you can bring in some new dynamics into meetings. And I'm just going to mention a handful here. And then the ones that are actually chosen, it matters who your organization is and whether these are virtual or in person. And is it one team or is it cross-departmental? So one thing I would say is find a way to bridge into the personal just in a little bit in an appropriate amount so people can feel like they are not a machine, like who they are matters. And a check-in question at the beginning of every meeting, a quick question. Often we'll try to make these fun and playful, not deep and serious, but occasionally the dynamics lead us there to having that sort of conversation. But for the most part, what is your favorite summer lunchtime meal and why? As an example, people light up when they get to talk about food. And you learn about each other and you create a dynamic in that interaction. Now, the questions need to be designed so they don't launch into a 20-minute discussion, but you're all smart people. You can figure out how to do that, or you can ask for help. Revolving facilitation, and I'm not going to talk about the importance of facilitation today, other than to say, in any meeting, it's important to have a person who is facilitating the meeting. The importance of facilitation goes way beyond meetings, but facilitating the meeting means not running the meeting or controlling the meeting. It means making sure all voices are heard, that we know what we're doing, that we're wrapping it up in an effective way, and that the dynamics of the meeting are being cared for. And I think revolving facilitation on a team is a great way to do this, to take turns and to be supportive of one another. People's styles are going to be different. That requires safety to get to that point. But once you have a dynamic of safety, revolving facilitation is great. Try shorter meetings. I love the 15-minute meeting format because it forces you to say, what does this group really need to do or decide or share? Know what type of meeting it is. So we work with a taxonomy of meetings that there's a handful of different types of meetings. To know what type of meeting you're in helps everyone know what they're trying to do and why they're there. So I wish that fewer organizations would have update meetings. You have email and intranet and other tools in which you can share updates. Meeting time should be reserved for things that you need to work through, or you need some creative cross-pollination. Setting aside time for divergent wanderings. Sometimes when that wild and crazy idea comes up, maybe it deserves a half an hour of exploration, and maybe that can be formatted in a fun way. And maybe we learn something from that process that is beyond just whether or not we move forward with that idea. To develop rituals and practices, this is important, both in terms of sense of for relaxing the nervous system, to know going into a meeting, this thing is going to happen. We all know it's going to happen. And then once those rituals are developed, occasionally breaking them, because that keeps things fresh. And deciding as a team, what rituals do we like? What practices do we want to do? And then finally, just as in summary, to experiment and communicate, not just experiment, but to communicate. How did that work for everyone? Was that beneficial? Was it fun? Was it time well spent? So that is the end of my presentation. I am ready for any questions that have come up.
Hey, Todd, it's Stacy.
Hi, Stacy.
How are you?
Good.
Long time no see. I have a question about your dynamics. The ones that you put up on your screen, trust, safety, and so forth. Would you say that those are the ideal dynamics for any type of group that's trying to be healthy and productive? Or is there a superset of potential dynamics that might be available to us? And if we have a nice balance or something, we can still be a healthy and productive team.
Yeah, great question. So by their nature, dynamics are not something that you have or you don't have. They always exist, and they exist to a degree. And so there might be complete mistrust in a group, but there might be some level of trust to say, if I fell down, you might help me up. So the greater level of trust that you have, the greater risks you can take together, but you don't need to have the dial on trust turned all the way up to function well as a team. It just helps to know, like, where on that dial are we? And they do tend to go, when I said they're mutually reinforcing, they do tend to go together. So when teams are creative together, there's often a level of trust already built in, safety built in. I would say if you are doing something that, if it's a small insular team, then that dial needs to be higher, because you're really, there's a interdependence on each other. If you are a leadership team in which you have functions that are quite different and you just need to be able to share information, the dial may not need to be as high unless you want to take some strategic directions that require courage. And then the dial needs to be higher. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess maybe one little bit that you might add is there a larger set of dynamics that would help to make a team healthy, right? Something different from trust or safety? Or are those really the key things that you have listed there?
No, I mean, they are. I don't want to undermine them. I think the easiest one to look for is creativity. If people are just going about their jobs, doing what they have to do, it tends to feel slow and boring. And when teams are creative, there tends to be more life. There tends to be more laughter, and like safety and trust need attention, but I think perhaps have been getting a little too much attention, not because they're not important, but they're interconnected to something that is greater.
Okay. So like, for example, respect. Would you say that that's critical, but maybe it could fall within the definition of trust?
Yeah, I don't consider,
they're wrapped up together.
I don't consider respect as much of a dynamic. It tends to be an outcome of, if there is a recognition of value of each perspective and each other, the respect comes
Okay.
trailing behind. Or we can just have requirements that we interact in such a way that emails are respectful, that meetings are respectful.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was another question in the chat. Oh,
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions.
Couple.
Andy.
Yep, there's a couple in here. This first one's from Linda. Have you ever worked with a government entity like a county, city, village, or town? How might that be different than a company or NFP organization?
Yes. It's a great question. Right now, we are in the process of working with a local community. And I find that anytime that there's not just a singular drive for profits, that there tends to be a little bit more dynamics of life. Now, there's some for-profit companies that also, they really embody something that's a higher purpose too, and they can have those dynamics of life. But the thing that I love about a local community government organization is that they tend to be service oriented, and it's a lot of, it's refreshing to work with. I've actually had amazing experiences with government in the last 2 years, of just, it's meant a lot to me to see what it can look like when people are collaborating towards service.
Thanks for that. Next one from Angie here. Thank you, great presentation. Can you say more about the taxonomy of meetings? What are the different kinds that exist? Our team is working on creating a meeting glossary so we know what to expect when a meeting gets scheduled based on the name of the meeting.
Yep. So let's talk about some common ones. There's a decision-making meeting. And especially if you work more as a democratic team or organization, those are important because in those decision-making meetings, you have some sort of expected format. We tend to go towards consent-based decision-making, which means somebody offers a proposal. There's a process for talking through that proposal, and it's not a vote, but you're looking to get the go-ahead, and you get rich discussions like that. For some organizations, they don't have decision-making meetings because somebody sits in an office by themselves making decisions. But decision-making meetings are an important meeting type. A creative direction or a visioning meeting is one in which we are taking stock of where we're at and looking at possible paths. There's formats you can follow for that. We've started to try to call brainstorming heartstorming. A heartstorming meeting is just with the purpose of, we want to get all ideas out on the table and vet them to a degree, but we're not going to confuse that with a decision-making meeting. Part of the reason that having a taxonomy of meetings is important is you can try to do too much in a single meeting. And you really need some interstitial time. You need to be able to reflect and have side conversations in between something like a heartstorming meeting and a decision-making meeting. A sharing out meeting is different than a team update meeting, which I ranted about a little bit ago. A sharing out meeting can be, what does everybody need to know about that we're working on right now? What is exciting, and what questions are coming up? So the sharing out meeting is one that I really favor, it being like a 15-minute format, because that forces people to not get into explanation and just to say, hey, we want to give you a taste of what's going on. Here's what's going on. That's, I think, 4 of them. You know, we have about 10 different types that organizations will usually pick 3 or 4 and stick with those. You don't need to have too many, because the other thing is most organizations have too many meetings. If your calendar is full of 7 hours of meetings a day, I am guessing you are not doing the best creative work.
Great answer for that. So that's all the questions that have come in this time. Please go ahead and get your questions in if you did have any for Todd. I wanted to go ahead and put in another link here as well to our DreamBank's YouTube page. So this event is being recorded and will be premiered there in about a week. to where you can go back and watch it. And that also houses pretty much all of the events that we have done since the end of March in 2020 as well. So we have 9 distinct event series at DreamBank. I manage our small business and our career event series, but there's tons of other great content that lives on that website. You know, Todd, we are here at DreamBank built up of a community of fellow fearless dreamers, and we always like to ask our presenters, you know, what is one piece of advice that you have for someone who's actively pursuing a dream right now?
I should be prepared. You've asked me this before, haven't you?
I might have.
One piece of advice for somebody seeking their dreams: don't think too much. That is my advice. We tend to have a cognitive over-reliance, and if you can take steps right away, say yes quickly and take an action.
Thanks for that. There was another question that came in from Vanessa. How do you overcome subgroupings in teams?
First, I would question whether it needs to be overcome. People are going to migrate towards certain others, and you know, it's the difference between friends and factions. When you have people who are gathering in order to be against, or subgrouping in order to create a resistance or an enemy of some sort, then absolutely. So I don't want to discourage people from connecting with whom they want to connect with whatsoever. But there's ways of weaving. So, you know, in Zoom, a lot of people use the breakout rooms. We tend to be very intentional with our breakouts to put people together who have not spoken to each other, who have much different functions. We tend to try to do our part of subgrouping in a way that's really based on difference more than similarity. So when you think about weaving subgroups, you don't need to exert any control. You don't need to create any sort of rules. It's like, what can you do to create new bridges that perhaps didn't exist? And if those subgroupings develop into factions in some way, then it's really important as as a team or as a leader or as an organization that you develop the capacity to get in a room and talk about, not you're forming a faction that feels like junior high, but to say there feels like a difference that we're not speaking about that I'd like to talk about, and how can we work through this? Again, the importance of facilitation in that space, because you want to make sure that everyone feels safe in that discomfort, and it needs to be talked about. Thank you. It's a great question.
And with that, that looks like all the other questions that have come in. So we'll go ahead and cap it there. Todd, thank you so much for putting together a wonderful presentation. Thank you all, everyone, for taking time out of your day to join us here. It's much appreciated. Yeah, we will go ahead and wrap up, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Andy.
Take care.